Hello, this is a recording of Productivity and the Producer for Civics. One of the great problems in economics is how to combine resources in order to produce the goods and services we want. How, for example, do we combine our resources to produce a television set, a loaf of bread, or a pound of bacon? What actual steps go into the production of apple cider, ballpoint pens, or soap bubbles? If we are building houses or heating them, how many trees are we going to cut down for lumber and firewood? After all, if trees are scarce, it may be cheaper to substitute stones for building material and use coal for heating houses. What are the four factors of production? To answer these kinds of questions, we must look more closely at the factors of production: land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. Like everything else in the world of economics, they are scarce. Therefore, the production goal of any economy or business should be to find ways to combine these limited resources most efficiently. More efficient production means more goods are produced using fewer resources, or more goods are produced using the same amount of resources. Economists use the term productivity to measure how efficiently an economy produces goods and services with a fixed amount of resources over a given period of time. It is the measure of output or production. To understand this problem, let's look again at the four factors of production. Land. Another way to think of land is to think of our natural resources. These natural resources include mineral deposits, water, air, and vegetation that can be used for the purpose of producing some output. Land can be used in many different ways to produce the things we want. One of the primary uses for land is farming, but land can also be used as the ground on which an office building or factory is built. It is important to remember, of course, the principle of trade-offs. Land used to build a drive-in movie theater cannot be used to grow fruit or build houses. Land used to mine bauxite, coal, or diamonds cannot be used as an airport. Of course, a very important consideration in such decisions is the cost effectiveness of the choice. The productivity of an economy is tied directly to the quality and quantity of the natural resources. Fortunately, in the United States, we are blessed with a variety of natural resources. Although we must import some resources, such as natural rubber, platinum, and oil from other countries, we are indeed a richly endowed nation. Other countries are not so well off. Some have only a few natural resources. Clearly, a farmer would have a lot easier time growing crops in the rich bottomland of Mississippi than in the frozen wastelands of Mongolia. The same amount of physical labor would produce far more firewood in the forests of Oregon than in the Sahara Desert. The two pictures at the top indicate land that is used for strip mining to extract a mineral on the left, which cannot be used for an agricultural crop such as celery. The determination of how to use the land is one type of trade-off. Labor. The term labor refers to our human resources. It is human labor that turns natural resources into goods and services. How productive our men and women are depends on their training, their skills, and their health. Not all workers are the same. Strong, healthy, well-educated workers are more productive than weak, undernourished, illiterate workers. In regions where disease is common, the food is poor, and scholars are scarce, the level of worker productivity is low. Even modern farming methods or equipment aren't going to be much help to the farmer who is too sick to get out of bed in the morning. Machines largely have replaced the need for unskilled workers in industrialized countries such as the United States, Germany, and Australia. The vast majority of the workforce in these countries is skilled labor. Skilled jobs require workers who can read and follow written instructions. Skilled workers can read instruction manuals and warning labels on pesticides. Illiterate workers, on the other hand, must be shown how to do everything over and over again until they have mastered the task. This obviously wastes time and severely limits the potential of the worker to improve himself or herself. Without an educated workforce, an economy must fall back on more primitive and less productive methods. Capital. And at the top of this page, there are a number of Boston Herald trucks, and it says a trucking line used to deliver a product is an example of a capital good. Capital is a factor of production. As a factor of production means the actual goods used in the production of other goods and services. These capital goods are not directly consumed themselves, rather they are used to increase the productivity of labor. As we have seen, capital includes durable goods such as office buildings, factories, docks, computers, tools, nuclear reactors. Capital also includes things used to transport goods to the consumers, such as pipelines, trucks, ships, highways, and airplanes. The decision to produce capital goods must be a conscious one. After all, the production of capital goods means that scarce resources will have to be diverted from the production of consumer goods, which are goods meant for immediate consumption by consumers. In other words, the metal used in the production of punch presses or factory girders cannot be used to build bed frames or bicycles. In the long run, the short-term sacrifice of consumer goods may pay off, since an increased stock of capital goods will mean greater production of other goods, capital as well as consumer, in the future. Look at the example of making costumes for the school drama club. You could sew the costumes by hand with no capital investment, or you could make a capital investment by buying a sewing machine. The money spent on the sewing machine and the time spent learning to use it will be well worth it. True, you probably could have made a costume by hand while you were learning to operate the sewing machine. Once you have mastered the sewing machine, your productivity will be greatly increased and you will be able to produce costumes much faster than you ever could by hand. Modern capital tools are the heritage of the past. They are the result of centuries of experimentation and development. Over the years, people have been willing to invest some of their scarce resources in the production of capital goods. Each generation's supply of capital goods was made possible by the efforts and sacrifices of the previous generation. If all our capital goods were suddenly destroyed, we would have to rebuild our society from scratch. Capital goods, of course, can become outdated and useless. Mills or factories that pollute our air and water beyond acceptable limits may be forced to close their doors. Others are just too old and can't compete with modern, more efficient plants. Capital goods eventually lose their value. They then must be replaced with new capital goods. The image on this page shows industrialization of manufacturing processes, showing some type of mill with machinery from the past. Entrepreneurship. The last factor of production is entrepreneurship. In some ways, we entrepreneurs, sometimes called managers or owners, can be thought of as part of labor, since management is a human resource too. However, the entrepreneur plays a different role than a manager. In our modern society, this role is so important that it deserves to be treated as a separate category. It is the entrepreneur who sees an economic need and tries to fill it. An entrepreneur is a person who is willing to take risks with new ideas. It is the entrepreneur who makes most of the really important decisions for a company. He or she is the one who decides how other people will make new products or provide new services. It is the entrepreneur who decides how to mix the other three factors of production in the most efficient manner. It is the entrepreneur who weighs the costs of the factors relative to the individual productivity or contribution to the value of the product. How to make a loaf of bread. At the beginning of this chapter, we raised the question about how a good or service should be produced. Well, the answer lies in how we decide to combine the factors of production. We could, for example, produce educated children by using fewer teachers, labor, and more televised lectures, books, and videotapes, capital. Homes could be prefabricated in factories with the use of advanced machines instead of being built on the site with nails and hammers by a team of skilled carpenters. Automatic bank tellers open 24 hours a day could replace some human tellers who work only 8 hours a day. The best mix of land, labor, and capital depends on the quality and quantity of resources that are available to an economy. There is no one right answer for all types of economies. How should the wheat be grown? Now let's look at how different societies might go about producing a loaf of bread. Table 2.1 gives some statistical comparisons for China, India, and Australia. Each nation produces bread, and each nation has land, labor, and capital resources. How do the managers in each country put these three factors of production together to make a loaf of bread? In China and India, labor is cheap and plentiful. Land, on the other hand, is relatively scarce, as the population per square mile indicates. China and India are also relatively poor countries without great amounts of capital. Therefore, the managers in these two countries have to use large amounts of labor and only a small amount of land and capital to grow the wheat needed to make a loaf of bread. Chinese and Indian workers use simple tools as they try to make every inch of their limited soil count. This style of production is called labor intensive because so much labor is used relative to land and capital. The situation in Australia is just the opposite. Australia grows so much wheat that it is one of the nation's leading exports, but the managers in Australia grow their wheat differently than the managers in China or India. In Australia, labor is well educated, as the 100% literacy figure shows, and expensive. Managers cannot afford to hire lots of workers to farm a few acres. Although Australia doesn't have a large amount of arable land, there is still more than enough, given the small size of its population. Managers in Australia need only a small amount of skilled labor combined with enough land and plenty of capital equipment to grow a huge surplus of wheat. The method of farming is called capital intensive because it uses a large amount of capital equipment relative to the number of workers. For Australia, this is the most efficient way to grow wheat. All three countries use a mix of the three factors of production. The managers in each economy must choose which mix is best for them. It probably would not make sense for the Chinese or Indians to adopt the Australian model to grow wheat because the huge tractors needed would be too expensive and will put too many farmers out of work. The Chinese and Indians have to use people because that is their major resource. Who bakes the bread? What happens after the wheat is harvested? The wheat has to be turned into flour. Again, this can be done by many hands, or it can be done by building a mill to grind the wheat into flour. Once you have the flour, you can make your own loaf of bread, or you can let a baker make the bread for you. In countries like China and India, people tend to make their own bread, while in more developed countries, like Australia and the United States, people tend to let the baker do the work. Even though most of us might prefer the taste of homemade bread, we generally let someone else bake our bread for us. The reason for this is simple. Store bread is so cheap, it really doesn't make much sense to spend precious time baking our own. Most of us give the opportunity to bake our own bread because we can make better use of our time doing something else. The opportunity cost of baking homemade bread is simply too great. The shift toward more capital. As we have seen in the example of Australia farming methods, labor-saving tools increase our ability to grow wheat. We become more productive when we rely less on human labor and rely more on capital tools. This is one reason why people in more advanced economies have so many goods and so much leisure time. We let our machines do the work for us. A capital-intensive economy does come with a price tag. The introduction of new and more advanced technology means that the workers must be well educated and flexible. There's not much call these days for an illiterate farmer armed only with a hoe or a travel agent who cannot use a computer. As automated equipment and robots invade the production process, the nature of the job market itself changes. Thousands of workers in such heavy industries as automobiles and steel have lost their jobs to automation. This means special challenges for those displaced workers. Only those workers who are able to adjust to changing economic conditions will find new jobs that are challenging and well paid. The key, as always, is having an ability to read and write and having the willingness to learn new skills. A shift in the workforce. Look at graph 2.1. The United States is producing more and more goods every year. Yet the percentage of workers needed in the production of goods keeps dropping. In 1955, 40% of all non-farm workers had jobs in factories. By 1985, that number had dropped to only 25%. Meanwhile, the number of workers providing services such as travel agents, medical specialists, business consultants, social workers, and so forth has increased steadily. Sophisticated machinery has driven the farmer off the land and is now driving the worker out of the factory. This is why many people now refer to the American economy as post-industrial. The ever-increasing use of capital equipment is changing the way we do things and is having a profound impact on all our lives.